Welcome to the Disinformation Tech Podcast, where we explore the role that technology plays in both spreading and combating disinformation.
We didn't try to use fake news. It's become a tool of war.
The kind of conversation around AI overlooks the issue of misinformation.
Next for AI and disinformation.
It's one of my areas of greatest concern.
Facebook and Google advertising linked to disinformation.
Disinformation.
Fake news.
Fake news. Fake news.
Fake news. Fake news. Fake news.
Hey everyone, so today we are here with Gaston Welisch. He is the creator of Botter, a educational platform or website, if you will, that he has created to raise awareness around the possibility of creating disinformation using technology and using bots. Now, as a disclaimer for the podcast, what we would like to mention is that we are not for disinformation. We merely are here to raise awareness around the issue of technology that is being used to propagate it. This podcast is a podcast that aims to bring on people who are working in tech in some way to try and solve the problem of disinformation. As on a similar note, it's also a podcast to raise awareness around the different things that are happening in this space. So again, we are not for disinformation. This is a platform that could potentially be used in a media literacy context, where maybe you bring it into a classroom and you use it to discuss how bots might be used to propagate disinformation. And it is merely a platform to raise awareness around this possibility. But we are not actively actually out there trying to use bots to create real disinformation. And it's satirical in its approach, and I encourage everyone to visit the website and see that it does have safeguards, and it is in a sandbox environment, if you will. So, having said all of that, I want to dive into the real reason we're here, which is Gaston Welisch, and let Gaston give us his introduction. Gaston.
Thanks, Eric. Nice introduction. Hi, everyone. I'm Gaston. I'm a researcher, a designer, and an artist. And I'm here to discuss Botter, which, as Eric presented, is kind of a tool to discuss or let people experience for themselves how easy it is to create disinformation using AI tools. And it has a kind of pedagogical element of both awareness and teaching, but I would predominantly describe it as more of an interactive experience in the way that it lets people try things for themselves to get those learnings in a less guided way, and perhaps more in a way where they have to make those conclusions for themselves.
Yeah, I would say before we get into a demo and we let you show the website for anyone who might be watching the video version of the podcast, I would say first that what really stood out to me whenever I started interacting with the bots on the website is, one, how much human input might go into actually getting the bot to propagate whatever it is you might want it to propagate, right? If you were a malicious actor in the position where you were doing such a thing. But two, how much of the workload it would remove from you if you were someone who might be doing this. So what is eye-opening is, you can imagine a situation where in the past, someone might have had to employ a team of 50 people or 20 people to push out a certain volume of disinformation, whereas now with the invention of AI and these large language models that can create human-readable text that sounds like something a human created, now one person can do the work of what maybe 20 or 50 people could do previously in the past. And so while there is some human input there that is required, what stood out to me is the severity of how easy it is for someone to actually do this, and how programmable these bots might be, and how believable some of them might be. So Botter. I think it's due for a demo for any viewers who might be watching, and for those listening via audio, while Gaston's providing the demo, Gaston, if you will, and I'll try and help. We'll just try and provide some context and talk it out as we're showing the screen. That way, for anyone who's listening without video can understand what's going on.
I'll do my best, to visually narrate the website.
That's the task before us. So.
All good. So just to recap for any listeners, this is the landing page, and both for GDPR reasons, which are kind of European data protection, I need to tell people that I'm recording some of their data because it's social media type of interaction where any bot posts that are created by people are kept in a feed. So I need to tell people that this information is recorded. And it also gives people a bit of an intro into how the site works. So this idea that you have a bot that will create a disinformation post tailored for you, and that you're encouraged to interact with past posts to create a discussion around some of the topics that are being presented. And then we've got topics, political orientation of the post, and an empty text box, which lets people give some directions to the bot, but also is a tool for me to understand how people interact with this tool and kind of what they're interested in seeing. And what we're talking about with Zeri in previous meetings is that oftentimes there's a calendar element to some of what is being put into this free generation box. When the war in Ukraine began, for example, there were a lot of posts about Russia and Ukraine. Same with the conflict in Gaza. And that's also pushed me to update the safeguards to keep the website secure. Part of my job when I created the site was to think about what was okay to satirize and what was not okay. And a bit of that was putting things into safe, intermediate, and controversial categories. So controversial would be things like climate change, like claims of rigging and voter fraud with elections, fake news about Brexit, and things that I guess could be considered more safer, like flat earth myths, UFOs and extraterrestrial life. But of course, it's also a bit of a provocation to put these here because you could argue that all type of disinformation is dangerous. So we're going to do something about local cryptids and do something libertarian and ask for vacation pictures of Bigfoot. So I'm going for something a bit more humorous with this one, but you can see in the background there's a previous post that's about a military clash in the Chinese Sea, which is a lot more close to kind of current events and things that could potentially happen. Seri, do you want to read the post?
Yeah, absolutely. So first, I'll say the image generation is an interesting feature, and I love the fact that it's very clearly a non-real image, right? AI has the ability now to create images that look realistic, but here I think that the website is set up in such a way that people would immediately see this and say that's not real, that's fake. And then two, not only does the image have this kind of satirical cartoon-like look, you've also got this disclaimer up at the top right of the website that says this is not real, right?
part of the design of the website is that there's a filter on the image that makes it look slightly grainy, like it's printed on a tabloid newspaper, so that people can't share the original image. And then if they're even screenshotting it, there's this effect that effectively watermarks the image. So that's a kind of additional guardrail.
Yeah, and this is something that I think our viewers would be appreciative of, right? Which is where you're demonstrating the potential for AI and bots to create this type of information, but you're doing it in a sandboxed way that adds safeguards around it, and this really creates a prime opportunity for education and just educating individuals on how they could actually potentially be on Facebook, on their Instagram, on their Twitter account, and they could actually see something that's been created by a bot that might, instead of showing a grainy image, show a real image that was created by artificial intelligence that looks real and could potentially fool them, as well as a post that could potentially fool them. So yeah, I'll read some of these.
Do you want to read the Beast of Exmoor?
I am excited. So everyone on the website, they get a unique handle or a unique username. Here we've got Insight Quartz. Some of these can be pretty funny. I encourage everyone to go and use the website and see what funny username it gives you. But here we can see saw the Beasts of Exmoor last night in North Devon. I'm probably botching Devon. Okay, I was like, I'm not sure if I'm botching the name here. Massive cat-like creature vanished into the fog. Our government's silence speaks volumes. Coincidence or cover-up? Stay vigilant. In politics, truth is stranger than fiction. And then we've got some hashtags here. Hashtag political cover-up, which is a little funny. It's got the tempo and it's got the format of what a tweet might have on say X, formerly Twitter, and it's also got it has the same type of language that you usually see in disinformation, which is often vague, probing, and attempting to alert the user in some way, and so artificial intelligence it can create these posts, right? It has the ability to word things in such a way that they're believable. This next one, breaking: Chinese naval forces repeatedly clash with a British merchant ship off the coast of Okinawa. Sources allege it's related to Beijing's aggressive move over disrupted islands. UK preparing diplomatic response. Are we on the brink? This is another great example. This idea of a clash off of Okinawa. I mean, that's something that could actually happen, right? This is illustrative of the kinds of things that these bots could stir up, right? And so on my end, I think that it is very important that people realize that the things that they see in their feeds might not necessarily be written by a real human being, right?
I think what's quite nice with this one as well is that it's got some attempts to make it sound authoritative. So it starts with breaking in all caps, which is how some news sites report on breaking news, at least on platforms like Twitter. And then it says sources allege. So it's kind of shifting the responsibility away from itself to make it sound like several people are saying this. And I think just reading it at a glance, you might be kind of falling into it, even if you don't look at the source it's originating from.
Yeah, if I saw that post on, say, my Facebook from maybe a friend or someone I accidentally added, or a promoted feed that I didn't realize was promoted or sponsored, a promoted post, I would actually have to go out and look and see if that was true, it would force me to stop scrolling and go and read more about that, at which point I might then find articles and websites that are also pushing that same piece of disinformation that I might find believable. I can recall a past experience where, and I'll provide a little background here as to where we were. This might be insightful for some of our users. So at one point, I took a contract job on a catching and processing vessel off of the coast of Alaska. And on this ship, on this fishing vessel, there were about 100 some odd employees. And those employees were from all over the world. So on the fishing vessel, we had people from Thailand, we had people from different parts of Africa, we had people from different parts of Latin America, Central America, Mexico. We had people from, I want to say there were people from Japan. I'm trying to think of some of the other places, but long story short, there were people from all over the world who were on this ship, all working together. On a ship flying underneath the flag of the United States. But the big thing to know is the fishing industry is very diverse. There are people from all parts of the globe. What's interesting about that is they bring to the scene different beliefs and all that all into the same place. And I can recall a few things from that experience. One, I walked into the little break room, galley room one day, and everyone in this room was predominantly from somewhere else outside the U.S., but they were all watching a documentary on the 9/11 conspiracy theories. And I remember thinking, are they watching this out of entertainment, or are they watching this out of not knowing what to believe and disbelief? On a separate occasion, I went up to one of my English counterparts, one of my American English-speaking counterparts, at the computer kiosk, of which there were only 4, and he was reading about a conspiracy theory around a political election at the time, and it was something on his Facebook feed, and he got outraged, and he pointed it out to me, and he showed me this post on his Facebook page. And at the time, I was a little more confrontational at a younger age. And I told him, I said, that's bullshit. Like, what you're reading is not true. And he said, no, I can show you that it's true. And so he showed me a website that was very clearly a website supporting that belief and trying to propagate that belief, that had a really funny domain name, right? It was blatantly and obviously a website that was created to push this conspiracy theory that he had saw on his Facebook page. And this is someone that who grew up in a country that has adequate access to educational resources, someone who grew up in a country that is very privileged and fortunate, and yet he still was someone who felt acceptable to disinformation. And so we are all, every one of us are susceptible to these things. And I think that, like I myself, I would probably be surprised if there were, say, some sort of technology or something that would let me know how many pieces of disinformation I encountered on Facebook throughout any given day. And I would probably be surprised at how many of them I thought were real or potentially legitimate myself. We all have our own cognitive biases and our own predispositions to believe certain things. And I tell that story to illustrate human beings. We have certain things that we want to believe and certain things that we'll just take at face value. And so if you are in a situation where a bot is just fueling something maybe that you already believe or have a disposition to believe, well, now that's a bigger problem than what it used to be, because these narratives, they can be created almost effortlessly in 2024.
I think what's quite interesting to me with disinformation as well is that it doesn't take a lot of people believing the disinformation for it to have a huge impact. Both in kind of the idea of sowing doubt and kind of making rational discourse impossible. Because if people start doubting that there's the possibility of truth, then it makes it a lot harder to discuss things like facts, or even to have rational discussions. And the one thing we were discussing about before is the idea for this site started when one of the first instances of AI disinformation through AI generated image was this image of the Pentagon in flames that was shared on Twitter at the time. And it was debunked almost immediately, but just this idea of something terrible happening sent ripples throughout the stock exchange. And I think quite a lot of people lost real money for something that looked quite obviously fake. So it just takes a little bit of people kind of going into panic selling for it to have this kind of ripple effect. So I would say no one is kind of free from being impacted by it.
Yeah, and I think that's something that this website illustrates. You've got a variety of different political spectrums that one can choose on the drop downs. You've got the ability to add freeform input, and it shows that you might get disinformation across a variety of political leanings or various beliefs, even just things that might not even be political at all. And that's important, right? It shows and it demonstrates and it illustrates that this is something that is a problem across all beliefs, whatever those beliefs may be. So Gaston, thank you for the share. So what we'll do is we'll pause the screen share. I do encourage everyone to go out and actually go play with it. So we'll have the link for that, and I encourage everyone to share it in an educational context and try and let your friends and family know that this is something that they may encounter. They may encounter bot traffic on their feeds, and this is just a tool to illustrate how easily someone might do that. Again, we're not for disinformation. We may make jokes or anything like that, but this is largely a platform that is for media literacy and raising awareness. So artificial intelligence obviously gets a bad rap in the media quite frequently because it can be used for these things. And I know in previous conversations, Gaston, we compare the idea of AI with nuclear energy. I don't know if you have any insights on that, and anything that you would like to share.
I think, it's quite tricky, isn't it? So I think you brought up the topic of nuclear energy with something that has quite obvious potential harms, but also very obvious potential benefits. And also as something that has its origins in military technology, and a lot of AI does have kind of military origins, like a lot of our technology, like the internet as well. So you have things like facial detection, drone. For piloting drones, and obviously it brings this question of control. So who designs the technology for what aims, and who ends up owning and using the technologies? I think for me, nuclear energy is quite an interesting parallel, but I also like the example of gene editing and all because it's kind of something that's closer to us and that we've ended up taking quite a different direction on. So in the kind of 2000s, there was a lot of discussion on how we can do GMOs, so genetically modified organisms, if we could do stem cell research, And in the end, GMOs are banned in Europe. Stem cell research was banned in the US. And I think we took a much more cautious approach. And I don't think I'm in a good position to say whether that was a good or bad idea. But with nuclear energy, there was the context of the Cold War, which pushed for what was called an arms race. And I think people are drawing the parallel with AI quite a lot on this idea that we must beat China and we must go faster. And perhaps it's good to bring other examples as well to the table.
I have to agree. There are several parallels that you could make with this technology in comparison to other technologies that have caused a similar disruption or conversation around the benefits and maybe potential harms of the technology. And I do think that it's good to draw comparisons to really figure out the true nature of something. I know in the field of anthropology in particular, there's often a conversation on any given subject, no matter what the subject is of discussion in anthropology. There's often a conversation around how do we compare this to something else, whether it be a cultural comparison against two cultures or across two separate cultures, or whether it be a comparison of, say, an artifact or a method of doing something, and that approach is normally insightful because it points out differences that you might not otherwise notice, or it points out certain aspects of the thing that you're talking about that you might not otherwise notice. And we bring up the comparison of AI with nuclear energy to illustrate this is a technology that can be used for harm, but it's also a technology that can be used for good. And so right now there are people who are feeding AI with things that we probably should not feed it with. And there are people who are feeding AI with things that we probably should, things for cancer research and things for certain search and rescue situations and things that can actually genuinely save lives and make the world a better place. I am an optimist, and I do believe that the general trend of technology is in a positive direction. Having said that, though, we're always, one slip away, one bad slip away, or one big mistake away, or one powerful malign actor away from a big problem, and it's important for people to realize this. Previously, we discussed the concept of what, as a platform holder or platform owner, you allow to be visible. More and more, this is going to become important for social media platforms like Facebook, like Twitter-X, like Instagram, Reddit, all the rest, to say, okay, do we allow AI-derived content or do we block that content? And then how much censorship do we provide? You've created this platform of sorts, if you will. Obviously it's for educational purposes. And while creating it, you had to decide, how realistic you would allow these spots to be, or maybe how tempered down or tailored they might be, and you had to figure out how to put safeguards and everything on the platform. So I'm curious to know your thoughts on censorship and the problem it poses.
Yeah, I think it's kind of funny because it's not something I initially thought was going to be a problem. Especially because it's a platform where it's only fake news and kind of disinformation. So what more harmful could there be? But in the end, I ended up, because I did want to have unfiltered comments where people could discuss and kind of debate around the topics. I initially imagine that some people might be able to connect some of the fake stories with real ones, or with real types of disinformation that were out there. So I decided to put into place both some manual filtering and filtering through a free API, which is called Perspective API. It's by Jigsaw, which is kind of subsidiary of Google. And it allows you to filter toxic content, so things that might be insults between people, or kind of homophobic or racist content, things that are obscene. I think that's quite self-explanatory. Spam, identity attack, insults. And so that was put into place. And very quickly, when the platform went public, I saw that in part of my database, I kept everything that was filtered away. And I quickly see so that having this type of platform invited a lot of trolls to test its limits. And I think if you want to keep the conversation constructive and not make it an excuse for people to be as inflammatory as they want, you kind of need to put these guardrails into place. And I don't think that's a way to... I think censor is a bad word for it. In a way, it's not about limiting speech, it's about allowing it to be as constructive as possible. And so I think as the owner of a very small platform, I think it's still a responsibility that you need to make sure that nothing, that people who go onto that platform don't end up exposed to things that could be harmful.
Yeah. I think there's a lot to be said for free speech, but the stance that I currently take on the subject is such that if you are a platform owner, say you are a platform owner for X or Facebook, the big names that a lot of people know of, well, TikTok, et cetera, you can say in the name of free speech, we're going to take no approach towards censorship or sandboxing this, or trying to remove bad actors from the platform. And you can make the argument that you're doing that for the sake of free speech. But the stance that I currently take is almost a cop-out. It's almost an easy way out to shirk the responsibility and the workload of trying to have a safe platform. The internet is itself an amazing thing, and I think we would all agree that it's very good that the internet is something that anyone can post to. Having said that, though, thankfully there are certain technologies that one can put in place to make sure their kids can browse the internet safely, and there are certain things that can be done. I think that there has to be at least some conversation on behalf of a platform around how do we make this a safe environment for children, if they do stumble upon it, and how do we make this an environment where terrorist cells aren't actually forming and recruiting, actively recruiting, and if you don't at least acknowledge that's a problem and try and put at least some measures in place, and I think you're shirking responsibility. At the same time, it is important to not over restrict. And I don't know what the answer or the solution is, but I do think that the wrong answer is to just let everything go unhinged.
Yeah, I think it is definitely a tricky question, and I think that's been the value of putting this site together, is having a hands-on experience of what that looks like. And what's been like, because obviously I don't have the time to manually filter every comment or post. So that's why the AI-driven API has been really useful. But just tweaking those parameters a few digits leads to certain posts going or not, and fine-tuning that has been extremely difficult because you have people rewording their comments to see if that passes, and part of it is a UX issue, I guess, because what I decided to do is having a pop-up message telling people why their posts had been hidden, basically. And I think that's almost too gamified an answer, and some people saw it as a challenge. How can I get the most extreme thing to pass? Which I guess it is part of the nature of the platform. It's about gamifying disinformation, so I think I kind of brought this upon myself in some ways. But so yeah, it shows how incredibly difficult work it is. But as you said, it's that's not an excuse not to do it and just shift it away.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, just to reiterate, I don't claim to know what the solution is to these problems, and there probably is no one size fits all solution, and there probably will never be a perfect solution. But I do know that just saying in the name of free speech we're going to allow anything and everything is, to me, that seems as though you're shirking responsibility. I do think that at least some effort needs to be made towards providing safeguards on platforms. The API that you mentioned, I believe you said that is an API provided by Google. If there's a developer out there or anyone who has a platform or is aspiring to create a platform, will you be able to maybe discuss that API a little more?
Yeah, it's called perspectiveapi.com. I was quite surprised. Like, there's obviously a limit to free usage per month, but in the first month I got about 2,000 requests, and they all went through. So the limit is pretty generous, I think, and I'm sure they'll have discussions open for commercial usage if necessary. And the response time is very quick, so it doesn't induce any lag in the operation. And as I said, it's very fine-tunable. So if you want to allow explicit conversation of adult nature, then you can remove the obscene guardrail. So it's if you're wanting a kind of very free speech platform where everything is allowed, but you don't want bots or kind of spam from advertisers, then you can just use the spam category. So I think it is very flexible in that way.
Yeah, and so for viewers who may not know, real quick, an API is what's called an application programming interface, which if you don't know much about technology, that doesn't really tell you much, and honestly, even for me, it doesn't really tell me much. I'm not sure how we came up with that name, but effectively what it is it's a way to connect two different applications via an interface, right? An API interface, an application programming interface, and it allows one web application or cell phone app, whatever that application might be, to connect to the resources of another or the database of another, and almost use it as a service. And so what Gaston is describing here is a third-party service provided by Google, correct, called Perspective API, and it is a service that platforms can use to provide some sandboxing and cushions, if you will, on their platform. This is a remarkable thing that Google has given to the world, that this API exists.
So it's Jigsaw, which is kind of subgroup of Google, but yeah, it is. I think their motto is to build a safer internet, which I think everybody could agree with. And yeah, it is a remarkably useful tool, especially if you want to build dialogue and you want to have conversations that remain kind of constructive and positive. It's been, I think, in a lot of the experiments I've opened to public voices, trolling has always been kind of difficult to manage in ways that, yeah, if you want to have directly kind of live, publicly accessible and publicly posted user feedback, then it's necessary to have instant filtering. And yeah, it does provide that.
And so the way it works. Just one last question on the technical details here before we move on a little further. Does the API actually sit in your code? Does it actually sit within the function of the post button, or whenever someone actually clicks to post, does it then analyze the post and the content before actually allowing it or approving it?
So what it does is there's two. I only filter the human content, not the AI content, and I filter at 2 points. I filter for the posts, so all the stuff that people write in the free content gets sent to the API. And I filter for comments, because comments are directly visible without any filtering. So in case there's any kind of hateful remarks in those comments, that's why it gets sent to the API before being posted on the platform.
Okay, and then the prompt, all of the prompts for the bots are essentially a sandbox themselves, right?
Yeah, well, they're written in a way that nothing dangerous, or arguably nothing dangerous, should come out of them.
Okay, yeah, I bring up the technical details because I expect that some portion of the audience is going to have that orientation and that slant, and one of the goals here is not just to raise awareness, but also to provide insight for other people who might be working in this space.
So just maybe one last thing where we're still on the topic of moderation is, I think personally I'm of the opinion that AI moderation is not cure-all, so that you still need a human in the loop in all these things, and that's why it's not been used yet, but I did add a report function so that if any post is of really frankly poor taste and that wasn't caught by any of the filtering, then people can report that to me, and I'll have a look to see if the post needs hidden. And I also do kind of manual checks now and then to see if nothing has ended up there that shouldn't have. And I do think but a lot of platforms do still hire moderators to check, because the AI won't have the cultural context that we do, in the way that a post might be totally okay taken out of context, but if a tragedy happens today and a post on Butter is made to kind of make fun of that or kind of deride the suffering of others, then it would be in poor taste, but the AI has no way of knowing that, basically. So that's why I think there's still that kind of human element that's necessary.
I think that's an important addition. In our last podcast that we had with Lino was working on a platform that could fallacy check videos real time. So imagine you're watching a political debate, and one person on one side of the political debate uses an ad hominem attack, which is a logical fallacy on someone's character or their person, rather than addressing the actual argument that they're making. You just attack their individual person. It would call that out and tally it to, say, a scoreboard, and then say the other person used a non sequitur fallacy where they made an argument of which the conclusion did not follow from the premises. It would call that out and tally it in almost like a scoreboard like fashion. And we both agreed in that conversation and in that last podcast that the benefit of technology is it can do these things real time in a way that human beings might not be able to. Its speed is going to be faster. There's going to be an advantage behind its sheer speed and ability to do a thing, but it's not always going to be correct. It's not always going to be right, we both agreed that there is 100% a place for having a team of real human beings that also fact check the debate, check what AI has provided, and that this is a multifaceted problem that's probably going to take a multifaceted approach.
Yeah, it reminds me of because you have debates that have stakes that are enormous and where fact-checking live is so important. And it reminds me of the Trump-Kamala debate where there was that cats and dogs comment. And I don't know yet how AI could, because I think they had moderator call the city official, right? And that I guess that connection to real world people is necessary sometimes to get to the bottom of things, where publicly available information might be lacking or still, because it was kind of the infancy of this fake news story. So I think, yeah, it is tricky yet to see the role. Because I think the fallacy one, it's a grammar or syntax or language thing. So it doesn't need access to real-time information, right? It just needs that analysis of the speech. Whereas fake news, I think it is really tricky, right? Because you need a database.
Much more tricky. Much more tricky. And we talked a little bit about that too, this idea that AI is actually pretty good at picking out fallacies at the moment. It can do so with a decent level of accuracy, a useful level of accuracy. But fact checking is a lot more subjective. There's much more nuance, and it's a more difficult problem for AI.
Well, it's a problem for humans as well, I think, but...
Correct. So we mentioned the API and trying to create a safe platform. We also, in a previous call, we talked about a few different ways to maybe encourage debate or use this in maybe a classroom environment. Any thoughts on that?
Yep. So I think the main takeaway for me was when I published this, the social media aspect was, well, first to mirror disinformation on existing social media platforms like X or Twitter, but also the idea that people would be able to see what other people were interested in using this tool for and what type of content was posted. And so you have types of interactions that you can have on posts. So the upvote and downvote that people will be familiar with. You're able to comment on things. And this was part to see if certain posts would surface more than others because they were either more controversial or more humorous. And the other aspect was... In my naive hopes, I was hoping that there would be more discussion and more kind of picking apart of the posts or kind of commenting to link them to existing conspiracies or fake news stories. And the upvoting and downvoting worked really well when there were quite a lot of people on the platform, because I think it really did show what types of posts people are more interested in. The commenting worked really poorly, and I think what we were discussing is that roughly in terms of engagement stats, this was in the ballpark or slightly lower than most statistics I could find, but just the size of the platform means that you need a considerable amount of users to have any form of discussion starting. And so my takeaway is this is a much more useful tool to have discussions about in person, in contexts like classroom with students, to pair with either a lecture or an exercise or a type of workshop, or to present at conferences and things like this too. Because when you have a captive audience, then you're much more able to start these discussions and get people's opinions and get them to try and get their, like, you're able to dig deeper into why they did a certain thing and why their opinion about it is a certain way.
Yeah, I have to say, Gaston, if you do bring this into a classroom, please let me know. Please record it or provide some sort of context or feedback on how that goes. I took a logical thinking and critical thinking class in college. I believe the name of the class was Critical Thinking and Reasoning or something along those lines. And that was the first exposure that I had to fallacies and what fallacies were. And so I went through, here in my case, in this U.S. education system, my first 12 grades of never even knowing what a logical fallacy was. And I had no idea that there were hundreds of different ways that someone might try to manipulate or swing a conversation. I took no classes on propaganda specifically. I took no classes on disinformation specifically. I took no classes on media literacy in the early grades. And the only time I encountered these was whenever I paid out of pocket to go to college, higher education. And this is more of a U.S. problem, I believe. The U.S. is notoriously bad at teaching these things in the public school system, with some exceptions. But the idea of this being used to show kids at a young age, or maybe high schoolers, at least of age enough to be able to not overexpose them, I think is a good idea. I think it's a good approach towards teaching media literacy. I know that one of the things you mentioned is, if you had the ability to maybe use this in a lab context or a classroom context, or to actually observe people using the platform, that there might be a potential for learning how people interact with disinformation, what their responses are, and I think from a perspective of academia, that might provide some insights, and yeah, real quick, I know that you created the statistics portion of the website, and so if you would just tell us a little bit about maybe some of the statistics that you're gathering, and your
maybe I can try and share screen again.
Yeah, absolutely.
So if you go to the more info and the stats page, then you're able to see kind of the information that I'm gathering. And a lot of this, I guess, is stuff that I record anyway for the platform to work. And I guess I thought might as well make this accessible to people using it, because some people might find it interesting. And also, part of why I'm doing this is as a sort of research experiment to understand the value of a tool like this as kind of an educational interactive tool. And I think what this shows here is that mostly it's the kind of global north that's using the platform. There's a few people in South America and Africa, but it's mostly the States and the United Kingdom that have the users, because I think part of this is that most of the users come from Reddit after me sharing the site there. And then we can see the main political orientations. People gravitate toward the kind of more extreme ones. I guess part of this is just to game the system to see what the impact of choosing those political orientations is on the content of the posts. And I think something that I didn't really expect that much is people, but maybe I should have expected, people choose the more controversial topics. So the ones at the bottom of the list, like geopolitical events, climate change, scams and fraud, financial markets, major disasters. But to me, the most interesting is seeing what people input into the free input box. I mentioned this earlier, but a lot of it are reactions to kind of what is currently in the news, what people stress about and think about a lot. So as I said, things like current wars going on, and this to me is tricky because this is, do you want to enable discussions around these themes, and where does the kind of mark for tastelessness begin? There were a lot of posts around US elections as well. But then there's also more humorous ones. And I think in the future it might be worth collating all this data together to post, to write a journal article to kind of start understanding the dynamics of what it is that makes people tick on the platform. And part of it is also looking at posts that were most upvoted or most debunked and why. And the few comments that were left. So you can see out of 2,000 posts, there were only 72 comments, which is still a decent number if you think about a qualitative study. Having 72 people leave some sort of writing is pretty good.
Absolutely.
And even, so we've got total visitors 7,500 and total people who interacted, so that means created at least one post is 1,400. And I mean, most studies that I could undertake, I'd be able to interview max maybe 20, 30 people. So I think it has its value as a research tool. I'll stop sharing.
Absolutely. You mentioned the calendar nature, the calendar aspect of the data in our last call, and I really like how you described that. You described it as being calendar-like in nature, and by that you meant that based off of what's going on in the world, kind of determines what people are more likely to post on the platform. That obviously is something that's useful. It might be a tip-off or something new that's spreading. It might be indicative of what's on the public consciousness at the time. The other thing is it shows the power of the news cycle in what news and media outlets choose to publish and post and make public. A lot of the things that people are talking about are things that people are talking about for the sheer fact that other people are talking about them. And I think often media outlets could do a better job at just choosing not to talk about some things and not give it a platform in the first place. And so for the statistics behind the site and everything, I think that there are a lot of gems there that could be mined from it. You mentioned comments and how you have about the average rate of engagement that you would see on comments. It poses an interesting challenge from a user experience, software development standpoint, platform builder standpoint of, how do you encourage interaction on any given site? It's an obvious thing that human beings are naturally going to take the path of least resistance, right? And so leaving a comment is something that takes some physical effort, some input, some thought, a little more energy than just passively posting or upvoting or downvoting. And so you're really there. You're just fighting that human tendency. And I think every platform has that issue.
I think it's also part of it is what kind of incentive is there on a platform like this to leave a comment? Because it's not like Instagram where you're going to be returning and you're within a form of community or a space that you're belonging in. Most people will have 1 or 2 visits on Butter, and there's very few returning users. And I think part of it is they've seen the gimmick, they've understood the message, they don't need to come back, and all the features that are there to try and get people to come back are not really enough, because the value is not in coming back, I think, or at least it could be, but it's not yet. So I've put into place things like badges, notifications, as we said, comments, or even following people. But I think these are somehow a bit overkill for what the website does. Because to be honest, would you come back to social media that has only disinformation every day? Do you need your fix of disinformation? And maybe not. Maybe some people do. I think what's interesting is I did have a few hardcore users. So some people clearly do have do see the value in coming back. And I guess if people are not coming back, then maybe the comments need to be explained in a different way, in the way that they're useful for me. They're useful for me to understand, and they're useful for future people to have a look at what other humans thought about these bot posts. And I think that's perhaps not what comments are usually about. So perhaps there's a way that can be explained further.
All interesting discussion. All very, very interesting. I do think that the concept of gamification helps. Of course, obviously, you get to a point where it's like, okay, do we have overkill? Towards that gamification approach, and like Reddit uses karma points. I think YouTube uses subscribers. There's video games have different levels you can rank up. So maybe you go from being a peasant to being the overlord dictator on the site, and maybe there's one user on the site that is the dictator or something. I don't know. There's much different fun ways that something like that could be spun. The big reason I wanted to get you on, Gaston, is to just kind of show the world and help spread this idea of using a platform like this to provide a fun way of educating people about how disinformation spreads, what it might look like on a social media website, educating people on the fact that a post may be from a bot and it may not actually be from a human being, and in fact it can very easily be created. And I think that's the value. I think that's the value here. I think without beating a dead horse or going much further into that, on the surface level, I think that is the main value. And I want to thank you for taking time to discuss the statistics and maybe the insights that could be gained from a website like this, the challenges that you faced when putting the site together. Real quick, anything else that maybe you would like to share, or anything that's top of mind that maybe my questions haven't opened up?
I think maybe just I know we've touched upon this, but this balance between satire and it being kind of real enough to still be scary. I think in the questions you sent me beforehand, there's been what kind of feedback I've received from the public, what the reaction has been like, and I think it's it's a tricky balance to maintain, right? For it to be safe enough that if it were taken out of context, people will still be able to know that this is satire, but to still have those hints of it being real enough to warn about the danger. And comments on this have been quite mixed. So where I posted this on Reddit, some people said that they couldn't take it seriously enough because it had that satirical element. And some people thought that, fake news and disinformation was such a big issue that it was not something you could make fun of. And that was dangerous on its own already in kind of muddying the waters of reality. So I think I've found the compromise that I'm most happy with. And I think I'm okay with it being a bit controversial, because that's the point of it. It needs to garner a bit of debate for it to be effective. But experiments like this I think are quite tricky to walk the right line.
Absolutely. So I encourage everyone to go out and visit the website. Again, we'll post a link for that in the comments or description based off the platform. So please go visit the site and see for yourself that there are safeguards on this, and that it is something that can be used for educational purposes. Share it with your platform. Share it on your social media and add some context on what the site is about and what it's for. If you're an educator, know that this is a fun tool that you could use. Students love engagement. They love talking as groups, and it can make the classroom a little more lively if you use something like this. So if you know a professor of philosophy or someone who teaches media literacy, or if you know anyone who is in a position where they're teaching a critical thinking and reasoning class, or maybe just a teacher who might want to share this with their students, please send this to them. Maybe they share it, maybe they don't, but it is a chance to just make sure that we as a community here on this planet are doing what we can to be aware, to be mindful, to stay vigilant, and to realize that these things exist. So Gaston, on my end, know that I'm honored, know that I'm grateful to have had the opportunity to have you on, and I am super excited to share this podcast with the world. We can't thank you enough.
Likewise, thanks for having me on, Terry.
Absolutely. And so till the next one, everyone, check out the links in the description below for the website, for maybe a little more on Gaston and how to stay in touch or follow Gaston and what he's up to. A very creative and intelligent individual who I think is worth following and keeping track of. So that's all we have for this podcast, everyone. Thank you, and we hope to see you in the next one. Till then, take care.
Cheers.